So what we're going to do here, hello everybody. I think we've taken care of most of our technical difficulties. My name is Gwen Armstrong, and I'm going to turn it right over to Qwustenuxun for our opening. Thank you for being here.
Nanu kachtasias to be nan masmen atanaquail. No kachtasias. Tap siapnesia. No sias no I just really wanted to use this opportunity to thank and acknowledge everyone here support our mustads at a time like this, and I just really wanted to help everybody here today by starting with a song, and to try to ground us in this work. So like I'd like to hand it back to Gwen Armstrong.
Hi, Chika. Thank you. Thank you for that opening. And we're going to next go to Dr. David Suzuki, who I really think needs no introduction. I think everybody knows what a national treasure Dr. Suzuki is, and how much he has done for this country. And for people of my generation, we've absolutely grown up with them. And so it's it's almost surreal for me to be even speaking directly to you. So thank you. And you offered today to just give a to follow Qwustenuxun's opening with a short introduction addressing the fathers, because this event is all about fathers. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Suzuki. Oh, Dr. Suzuki, it doesn't seem like we fixed your audio problems after all. So I've emailed you my phone number. You can call me and put you on speakerphone, and I will. If you want to do that, we would love it. And if not, it's understandable. And we thank you for appearing here today. And we'll let you go. And sorry for the technical difficulties. So honestly, having your presence here is pretty awesome anyway. So I'm gonna continue the event here, and I'll say, for those who just joined, my name is Gwen Armstrong. I am an organizer with 4 Hour Kids. I'm also a dad. I've got twin toddlers, got 2-year-olds, and you know, it's a lot of work. It's been about a year and a half that I've been with for our kids, or I suppose a little bit less. I wasn't here from the very beginning, but I've been here for much of this organization's life as it's grown. You might be able to hear my kids in the background at some point. So I live here on Cowichan territory. I live on Vancouver Island near Duncan, just outside of Duncan, BC. I'm really excited about this event because you know, our organization is about parents. We are parents and grandparents coming together to take action on climate change. To be honest, most of the organizers, most of the volunteers, most of the people in this organization are mothers and grandmothers. There are some dads in this organization, including me and including John Paul, who's going to be speaking today. But we've been asking why that is, and we want to, you know, create space and encourage dads to come in and join and be part of the solution. So I've been working on climate advocacy for basically my adult life. But when I had kids 2 years ago, it, you know, shifted my perspective substantially. And so finding this organization meant a lot to me, and to know like I could join with other parents who really feel this urgency and this like heavy responsibility. And the context for this event is heavy today. I think that we have to mention what's happening with these, you know, all these new findings of these mass grave sites at residential schools. It's heart-wrenching for everyone, I think, and you know, certainly as a parent, it's completely heart-wrenching, and it's eye-opening. Every day, we also, you know, are seeing these climate tragedies, floods, heat waves, devastating forest fires. Maybe that condo collapse in Miami where 150 people are still missing, that may have been, climate change may well have been a factor there. And so these are all eye-opening, these are all wake-up calls. And of course, Indigenous people have long been saying that what's happened at residential schools, and scientists have long been saying what's happening to our climate and what will happen if we don't act fast. So none of this should be shocking, and yet, for me at least, it can be shocking again and again. They're hard realities to face. So it's hard to face them, and it's even harder to say, okay, this is what's happening, and I want to be part of the solution. I want to take action, and so I think that's why we're all here today. So I just want to thank everyone for kind of taking those steps and saying, you know, daring to say that, hey, my actions, they might make a difference, or my actions do make a difference. I also, you know, I have to mention too that we're in the midst of this historic heat wave. Like today is the hottest day on record for Vancouver, the hottest day on record for BC. We had the hottest day in Canada a few days ago in interior BC. So like we're in the middle of climate crisis. It's happening as we speak. And so this is the reality that kind of brings us here today. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to pass it over to our three speakers. I'm really excited that the three of you have agreed to join us today. We're really lucky to have you. So we're going to hear today from John Paul Kleiner, he's a father, of course, and a community organizer with For Our Kids Toronto. The Toronto team has been really active, and John Paul is just a great example of someone who decided that he had to get involved, and he's going for it. So I'm really excited to hear from him. We're also joined by Qwustenuxun, who we heard from in the opening, and thank you for providing the opening as well as being a speaker today. He is the Elders Kitchen Manager for Cowichan Tribes. He's also a writer for Discourse online newspaper. And so I really encourage everyone to check out his thoughtful writing in the Discourse, and also on Facebook. Qwustenuxun, your Facebook posts are so thoughtful. And I really appreciate those almost every day, talking about being a dad and what it means, and your culture and all these things. And finally, of course, we're joined by the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson. He's the MP, as many of you know, for North Vancouver, and of course, Canada's Minister for Environment and Climate Change, and of course, also a dad. So thank you for taking the time to be here, and we're all here to talk about what it means to be a dad in the midst of climate change, climate emergency. So I would say that each of you, three speakers today, are approaching climate action from pretty different perspectives. And so I'm really excited to hear those perspectives, and also hear what connects them. So we'll get started. I want to thank everyone who submitted questions in advance. And certainly we won't be able to get to all of them because there were lots of questions, really thoughtful questions. But we're going to start with a pretty simple one. And so we're going to start with John Paul. John Paul, the question is, and the question for all three of you will be, how did you first get involved in climate action? And John Paul, will just wait for you to get unmuted here. And go ahead.
Great. Wonderful. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, Galen. Thank you to everyone for taking the time, and thank you for the question. Yeah, my path to action from the sidelines was a long one. Obviously, I mean, climate change, it's certainly not new to me. I've grown up my entire adult life being aware of this issue, but it's always loomed off on the horizon. So it was always somewhat of a distance. I'm an older dad. I'm a typical Toronto dad. Our daughter was born in 2006 when I was 39. And shortly after she was born, I remember reading an article about climate change, climate crisis, in which scientists were predicting dramatic impacts within the next 70 to 90 years. So this was 2006. And so these are the things that you've already alluded to, Galen, and we see in the news every day: extreme heat, rising sea levels, et cetera. And I remember doing the math. 70 to 90 years, well, you know, if everything goes terribly, she'll still have had a pretty good life. I mean, I'm not proud of that calculation, but I'd be shocked if there weren't people here tonight who haven't had the same thoughts. Very self-centered, not productive, but that was sort of the starting point, I guess. And, you know, in those years, it was on my radar. I did what I think a lot of us have done or continue to do, gave money to environmental charities, sort of outsourced the problem. I was also active in political organizing, and climate, you know, action was certainly on the agenda, but never at the top. And, you know, I think I was where a lot of Canadians are, frankly, now. You know, if you had asked me then, I would certainly have said that, you know, climate change and its effects were very important to me, but that attitude didn't really translate into much in the way of personal action. It was a problem, but it really was somebody else's. And in the intervening years, that really has changed. A number of events and developments have certainly impressed upon me the need for getting involved. Again, these climate-related calamities of recent years, the wildfires, you know, well, pick your place: Alberta, California, Australia, monsoon rains, strange weathers here in, you know, my own Ontario, you know, the constant media churn around these developments. One particular report that really made an impact on me was the idea or the fact that, you know, in the last 30 years, we've created as much in the way of emissions as humanity did in the previous 30. That corresponds essentially with my entire adult life. So that was a real direct hit. And then, of course, this is all happening against a backdrop here in Canada where not only were we not taking steps to address the problem, we were actually moving backwards. But the real change that happened with the aging of my daughter. And one of the great things to see is how her public school education is really educating her around the realities of climate change. I mean, it's heartbreaking, but they are educated in a way we certainly weren't as I went through school. And we began to talk with her over the years all the time about the planet, her future, what was being done, what wasn't being done. And that had a real impact on our family and our decisions. We changed our diet. We ate far less meat. We've really altered our consumption habits. You know, things have happened. But the real final push to getting involved came for me last fall when she asked me over the dinner table one evening, so if everyone knows that climate change is bad and that we're causing it, why doesn't anyone care? And I really don't recall what my partner and I answered. We said something. What I do recall vividly is the mix of feelings that left me with. So this combination of failure, deep sadness, anger, and resolve, you know, resolve to really show her, demonstrate to her that I, her father, do care. I care about her, her future, the planet. And, you know, then I began thinking, well, what did that mean in terms of action? And serendipity, of course, played its role. I received an email from the mom of one of our daughter's friends, in fact, asking if her contact list would be interested in joining For Our Kids. And I didn't hesitate. I read the little blurb, what the group was. It was exactly what I was looking for. And I've been involved in the Toronto group for about the past 6 months. And during that time, we've done a number of things. It's a great group of people. We've worked on a couple of main projects. First was lobbying MPs and senators around C12, the Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act that's currently, I believe, still in the Senate. And our next project that we're working on now is to create climate action hubs at Toronto area schools. These will bring together students, teachers, parents, and existing climate action groups. So we're really excited about that possibility. I will stop there for now and pass the baton.
Thank you so much, John Paul. That's really awesome to hear. And so next we'll go to Minister Wilkinson. So just to answer the question, how did you first get involved in climate action?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. But before I start, I'll say to John Paul that we are hopeful that C12 will clear the Senate tomorrow. So that would be good news. I guess I was a bit of an activist in my youth, but the issue when I was younger wasn't climate change. It was actually the prospect of nuclear war. So I would, be campaigning against cruise missile testing in Canada and those kinds of things back in the day. I got involved in the climate space initially, probably more intellectually than emotionally. I moved from Toronto to Vancouver and wanted to find a job that was more than just about the bottom line, that actually had some social purpose to the business. And I ended up moving into the clean tech space, working on hydrogen and fuel cell technologies that were about combating climate change at a time that it was very early, and climate change perhaps wasn't nearly as visible as an issue as it is now. But I got increasingly engaged from a personal perspective after I had kids. My daughters are actually probably not dissimilar to the age of John Paul's daughter, a little bit older. And as a father, I started thinking about the scope and the scale of the challenge, and the world that we would potentially be leaving to them if, in fact, we did not take on the responsibility to begin to address this in substantive ways. And I began to talk more with lots of folks that I knew about the climate issue, and became increasingly frustrated, and this is not to be partisan, but increasingly frustrated with the government in Canada of the day that really did not have a plan to address climate change, and on the international stage had put Canada into a situation where we were not very well regarded, I think it's fair to say, with respect to the work we were doing to address the climate issue. The catalyst for me becoming directly involved and deciding to actually enter the political realm was having lunch with a friend of mine, complaining about all the things that I thought the previous government was doing wrong, especially with respect to environmental issues. And he stopped me at one point and he said to me, well, that's all well and good, but you've said the same thing to me 10 times before. So, what are you prepared to do about it? And I thought about that a lot. I was the CEO of a company at that point, and I was happy doing what I was doing. And I went home a couple of days later and I talked to my wife about it, and I said, maybe I should get into politics and try to do something about it. And my wife was horrified at the idea of getting into politics. But she came around, and I decided that it was time to do something more direct. And I have had the enormous good fortune since I was elected in 2015 to work on climate and environmental issues from the very first day that I entered, initially as Parliamentary Secretary to Catherine McKenna when she was Environment Minister, then as Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, and now I have the best job in Canada, which is as Minister of Environment and Climate Change. I get to work on it each and every day.
Thank you, Minister. That's a lot of story that you crammed into just a couple of minutes. So you've done a lot. Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Qwustenuxun and ask you the same question. How did you first get involved in climate action?
Oh my, that's a question. I don't really think there was ever a line where they weren't what I was already doing. When we're young, we're raised in the woods, we're raised at the river, we're raised in the ocean, we're raised right with all that. So watching the change, right? Watching the place where you used to harvest ferns turn into a house, watching the woods all turn into houses, and then it gets hot because there's just houses everywhere. Watching it all change, right? Like, there was always this wonder, like, I can remember the elders like of my youth, they used to ask like, gee, when is it enough? Like, look how much there is already. Look at them. They're all over the place. No, there's more. That was 25, maybe 30 years ago, and it really never ended. So the idea of when did I get involved in climate action? Well, when I was raised by my Indigenous grandmother, that was just really like the way of the world. So, I was raised, hearing about how, when we're young, there were so many salmon in the river that if you could, walk on, salmon, you could just, walk across the river. Or, those old, runs that last for weeks, they'd just be running by the whole time. When I was a kid, I think we caught maybe 300 in one evening. And, like the elders would say, oh, gee, this is nothing. This is not really any fish at all. We used to get really lots. This is just, regular lots. And you think, okay, well, this is lots. But now that I'm a man, 30 years afterwards, I head to the river with my children to go to exactly where I used to harvest. And we use exactly the same technology. And I think we probably brought home 30 salmon during the whole year, and, as opposed to in one evening when we used to catch 300. So it never really occurred to me that there was a way to be that wasn't directly involved in trying to save the world, to hand over to our children. We're always raised that way, that we're not, once you have a child, it really is, it isn't about you anymore. And the elders, they love to remind you of that what you do now is to try to hand over the world over to them. And so it's pretty frightening to live where I live right now, in the world I live in right now, because this is what I'm handing over. And probably like everybody else here, I've worked hard to try to reduce the impacts that I have. We raise all our own meats and vegetables, but it's just such a big issue, and it is rooted in everything I do. And so every time I have to go harvesting, regardless of what it is, I always get asked. One of my children, will always ask, oh, what was this, when you were young, Dad? And you're like, oh, well, there was really lots here, son. There was all over this place was all like this. And they go, oh, but there's a bunch of houses over there now. And you go, yeah, but you just got to leave that alone. We'll just go over here. So everywhere you are, there it is. So, yeah. Exactly.
Ejka, thank you. We'll go now to the next question, and we'll go back to John Paul. And so this question is just a little less straightforward, and it's what does it mean to be a dad in these times? What does it mean to be a dad during the climate crisis? So going to you, John Paul.
Thanks, Galen. My gut reaction to that question is that it's daunting and terrifying. I think that as parents, we all want to try and prepare our children for their futures to the best we can, obviously. And to do this, we draw on our experience, those of our parents, the certainties of life as we have known it, and we communicate them to the kids. And while it's natural for those things to be called into question, to evolve and change, the reality is that the climate crisis, as Naomi Klein put it a number of years ago, really is changing everything. So as a parent, thinking about that and trying to project into the future and being so completely unsure of what it holds, I think that can be really disorienting, demoralizing, and frightening. But obviously, we have to get beyond that sense of fear that we may have. It's not productive. I know personally that it can be really crippling or paralyzing. And I think it's when I feel this fear that paradoxically, I think about the other key job we have as parents. I would say is to instill in our children a real sense of hope and possibility for the future, for their future. And one way that we can do this is to get involved in, helping to make the change that we know that is necessary for that positive future to happen. For me, working with For Our Kids is one way, as I've already mentioned, of showing our daughter how much I love her, how much I care for her and her future. And it also demonstrates to her and reminds me how change is made, shows her that when we see there's a wrong that needs attention, we have a responsibility as society, members of society, to get engaged and with others, create the communities that will make that change and sustain us as we move forward. So that's really sort of my reaction to the challenge of parenting at this time.
Thank you so much for that. This is just, I love listening to the three of you speak about this. As a parent with very young kids, I'm going to be facing these challenges in new ways as they get older. So next we're going to go to Minister Wilkinson for the same question. What does it mean to be a dad in these times of climate crisis?
Well, I agreed with what John Paul said. I guess just a couple things. I mean, I guess what I would say is, if you make the decision that you're going to have children, then it must be because you have faith that the future that you are bringing these children into can be a good one. Otherwise, why would you make that decision? And I would say one of the things that really troubles me deeply is when I hear young people today saying they don't see themselves ever having children, not because they don't want children, but because they don't have that hope for the future. Which is, I think, quite an indictment in terms of how we and some who came before us, generations that came before us, have managed this planet. I think that there is an obligation as a dad. I think certainly as a mom too, but I fully recognize that moms are far more engaged in this issue, probably for a number of reasons than dads, and that's something that needs to change. But I think that an obligation as a dad is an obligation to act to ensure that you are doing what you can to change what has been happening and to create a better future. And in that regard, it's not just the scientists saying, we have to do this because it's a biological imperative and all of these kinds of things. It should be for dads, I would think, a deeply personal issue. A deeply personal issue for dads, it's certainly for moms, but also for grandparents and aunts and uncles and those kinds of things. But I guess because we, moms and dads, made the decision to bring these beings into the world, the responsibility should weigh even more heavily. And that is to try to ensure that we actually have a livable environment. It's also to be thinking forward about how you can ensure that there is an economy in the future that actually will provide the kind of good jobs that our kids will aspire to have, and a standard of living that will be somewhat similar to what we've been able to enjoy in a manner that is sustainable from an environmental perspective. And I think that's the obligation that dads have. And increasingly, I think dads and moms are realizing that.
Thank you so much, Minister. And like you said, of course, it's not just dads, and it's not just moms. And with For Our Kids, we're focused on this role that we have as parents, but we're fully recognizing it's not as if we're alone, or in a lot of ways not even that special on this planet. Like, it's everybody. We don't mean to be exclusive in any way, and there's lots of aunties and uncles that are involved as well. So thanks for kind of pointing that out. So next to Qwustenuxun, and talking about this question of what does it mean to be a dad in these times of climate crisis.
My $1 million questions there, Sam. I just want to hop off of what I just heard. Why have kids if you don't have hope? It's an awesome question. We didn't want to have kids. I had to work on that one for a long time. I wanted to have hundreds of kids. But yeah, the world's kind of, it's hot out there. And so, what the reason I decided was that we needed to make like change, and we needed like to raise individuals who like knew what the world was like and what happened and like what has to change. And having in mind that my aunties and my grandparents went to residential schools. We haven't had really a chance to share the Aboriginal like view of how we can change this issue. Up until probably 20 years ago, nobody was listening to the Aboriginal world on what we could be doing to change the world to help resolve this issue. So one of the objectives, you know, that I had with raising my children was to try with, you know, everything I had to try to hang on to what I heard from elders and try to hand that right over to, you know, the like children, so that when, you know, like we go to the river, you know, they like realize that, you know, that is like, you know, the river that like we've used for, you know, thousands of years, you know, like we can like trace our like name, you know, all the way back. So they have all that, and they also realize that within 100 years we won't have a river anymore. It'll be all the way like dried up. And so trying to be a dad in this is trying to make sure that not only do they understand that the river is, you know, like who we are, and that it has supported us, you know, for 12,000 years, but that in their lifetime there won't actually be a river there anymore. And so they have to be able to walk in this world and you know, like say things like, this is the way it was. We need to help, you know, to try to, you know, like to like a return there. You know, the so many children I see, and you know, I'm going to be honest here. You know, like they play video games. You know, like they're on computers. You know, they're in their own world. You know, they're in, you know, the mall. You know, they're in their house. They're in you know, big city. I live in the woods. I live way out in the woods, and we're out in the woods, and like you know, like at the river, we're you know, up the mountain, we're there like watching everything happen. You know, we're watching the cedar trees, you know, like wilt and you know, leave. You know, that was you know, if there were like two things that could define our tribe, it would be, you know, the river and the red cedar tree. And within about 60 years, there'll be no more red cedar trees either. So we're out there and we're watching it happen. And I am raising these my young ones, you know, to know what happened, so that, you know, when they're old enough, you know, they, you know, like they can like remember, you know, like what was. And I try to change the world, you know, to be, you know, the way it was. So, yeah. Oh, high tap, siempre sí.
Hi, Chika, thank you. I mean, you know, what you're describing is just completely devastating, and just try to keep my composure here, but it's, you know, there's no way around it. It's really, really hard to face. We're gonna go to questions. We got a ton of questions from audience members in advance, and I see that for those of you sending questions to me and to the other hosts, I see those, and you're welcome to keep sending them. So like I said, we won't be able to get through them all, but we're gonna try here. So the way this will work for these next questions is the three of you speakers, please just chime in whenever you like. You don't need to feel like you need to answer every question, but you can if you want to. And you have the power to unmute, so you can feel free just to unmute yourself and jump in there at any time. So the first question is sort of a straightforward one, I guess. It's maybe, do you have any ideas for dads who are more hands-on oriented. They're less likely to write letters or go to meetings or be researching. You know, that kind of stuff isn't for everybody. So how can those people get involved?
I try to run away in the woods, you know, with those my young ones, you know, just like use, you know, like you know, those opportunities to really show them, you know, what's there, right? If we're outside all the time, then we love it outside. So yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah.
Maybe I can just say something. I mean, certainly there are lots of people who don't like to go to meetings and don't necessarily like to be seen as an activist or an advocate out there in the community. And obviously it takes all types in a community. But what I would say is we certainly need people who are willing to take that role, to try to play the role of advocating and convincing others that this is a cause worth being. And for those that don't feel comfortable in that kind of role, but are concerned about climate, they can take climate action in their own lives that can actually make a statement that can influence other people. So, you know, make your home more energy efficient, put a solar panel on your roof, stop driving a car and take public transit, or buy a zero emission vehicle as your next car. There are a range of things that people can do to have agency, to take action on climate change, to make it real for themselves, for their families, but also for the neighbors that live around them that see what they're doing to make a statement about climate change.
One of the things that's really impressed me, and I mean, I live in the largest city in the country, so I will acknowledge that, but the spectrum of activity that is going on in Toronto and the Golden Horseshoe, the greater Golden Horseshoe area, is just phenomenal. And there are literally, I would suggest, groups for every type of person and doing all the different activities. So there are groups that are more, I would say, hands-on, working to do those projects. I'll say here in Toronto for the R4R Kids chapter, I think I mentioned, our next project is this idea of creating climate action hubs at area schools here. And there will be very real projects that will grow out of those hubs. That is our vision. And that is a place for people like you. So, you know, there's all sorts of activities that are happening now in the movement, broadly defined. So I would be shocked if you put your feelers out in your area, you didn't find people who are doing things that you could identify with and want to contribute to.
Thank you. Thank all of you. That was, by the way, a question from somebody named Sylvan. Or no, sorry, this next one is from Sylvan. That question was from someone who's only known as Jay. But Sylvan actually asks a question that Qwustenuxun, you already answered essentially. I mean, you're welcome to say more on it. But the question is it appropriate teaching my kid the love of fishing and wildlife watching, knowing this will likely be gone in 10 to 20 years? So you spoke to that quite directly. There's a little bit more to it. Would teaching her the love of nature cause more harm than good to her and make her miserable? So I think you gave a really good answer to that already, and I think your I don't want to speak for you, but I think your message was, we've got to get out there and we've got to show them, and we've got to show them the truth. So I welcome you to speak more on that if you want to, but I also want to kind of turn to Minister Wilkinson, just because I know you wrote a blog post, or I'm sure you've written several on the topic of your own daughters who have kind of I forget how you put it, but they've encouraged you to take climate action. Is that right? And so I would just presume that you taught them some of this love of nature, and it kind of came back to you maybe. And so I'd love to hear your perspective on that as well.
Jared, did you want to go first? Yes, my daughters, especially my youngest daughter, who is actually a first-year university student in Toronto, encourages me every day to reflect on the work that I'm doing and to do more. And certainly she has been a big motivator for me in terms of trying to ensure that we're doing everything that we possibly can. To the specific comment, though, that's a really frightening question. And my view would be, my goodness, you should be introducing your child to nature and ensuring that they realize how magnificent it is, and therefore how important it is that we are actually doing the things we need to do to protect those spaces. You know, the world in the last 40 years has lost 60% of its biodiversity. And that is true in Canada too. We have almost 700 species that are listed as at risk or are in the process of being listed as at risk. And those include iconic species like boreal and southern mountain caribou, all the way to Pacific salmon. And certainly some of the impacts are around climate change, and it certainly underlines the fact that we need to do more to address the climate issue. Understanding that some of those impacts, even if we do that, are going to be felt for many years. But part of it is about the protection of nature. It's about creating more conserved and protected areas. It's about actually managing industrial development in a way that does not destroy species. And that only happens if people speak up and they say that the protection of nature is an important thing for them. I was meeting today with all of the provincial and territorial ministers, but all the leaders of the national Indigenous organizations talking about this exact issue. We need to find a way to move towards a place where we actually live in much greater harmony with the natural environment in a manner that Indigenous peoples have been talking about for a long time. And I will tell you that certainly the federal government hasn't done all the things that it should have done over the past number of decades. And in the provincial and territorial level, there's a long way to go. And the only way that governments actually understand that they need to take action, sometimes it's difficult, is if people are saying it's important. So I would say show your daughter and tell her it's important, because she's the kind of person that can help us to ensure that we're doing the right thing.
Thank you. Qwustenuxun, did you want to speak, or shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that it's almost as if the world wants us to move away from outside and to move inside. And we need to do the opposite right now. We need to be moving outside. We need to be running around in the woods. We need to be running in the river, so that when these children are the right age, that they can change the world, that, like they will, and, they will want to, and, they will know why. And so that's really the whole argument, that I have.
That's good. Thank you. Okay, so I've got another question here. And I'm just gonna read it. They said the role of carrying the past into the future is an amazing way to describe parenthood. And this is how I heard what Qwustenuxun was saying. So the question is, do you think that parents and grandparents in other times felt as deeply concerned about their kids' future as we do about our kids' futures now? Okay,
I'll jump in there. I would say it's difficult to gauge, the relative level of concern, but I know that my parents both had deep concerns about the future of the planet. Minister Wilkinson referred to it earlier. The Cold War, the mutually assured destruction, the development of nuclear arsenals was a very real thing. I grew up in Saskatchewan. My parents, both clergy, and Saskatchewan, as some of you may know, is one of the world's leading jurisdictions for uranium mining and supplying, the fuel for reactors, but also, the fuel potentially for nuclear weapons. And there was a movement afoot when we first moved to Saskatchewan, I believe in the late 70s, to start refining some of that material in the province. And my parents became very active opposing that. So they really were, models for me and my brother about responsible citizenhood, but also demonstrated that profound concern for the planet and for our futures. So I think that, yeah, I mean, we do tend to forget. I think the threat is very different now, but I think it's safe to say that certainly my parents had deep concern about the world they were leaving for me and my brother.
Thank you. Any other takers to that question, or we can move on to another one?
Yeah, that just it's a hard one for me to answer because my grandparents were worried about their children being taken away. So it's like, what do they say? The whole world is on fire. So which one of those fires is, like the worst one? Like, which one do you want to look at? Because their whole world was on fire. We lost our language, we lost our land, we lost pretty much everything. So on top of that, I can recall quite a few of the elders, which will be now in their 90s, referencing the elders of yesteryear. So like they're the elders that they knew were really worried about like the changes in the world. There is this wonderful quote from I'm pretty sure it's 1917. It's a Vancouver Sun headline said that there was a native elder said, "Why should we be made to suffer because the settlers want to supply the world with salmon and halibut?" And that was 103 years ago, and it hasn't changed. It's actually gotten worse. So the elders that I know, they've been worried for a long time, and they're, as a young man, probably halfway between youth and like an elder, I'm really worried. And if I don't have all the issues that the elders of like yesteryear had, because I'm actually able to raise my children, I am really sure if they had their children even then, that yes, they would really be worried about like the way the world is actually headed.
Thank you. Okay, well, we can move on to another question. And so we've got one, that we've already touched on a bit, but it's something that I think we keep coming back to. Somebody asks, this is somebody named Michael asks, how can an average dad like me, already overwhelmed with life and the universe and everything, engage in a way that can have an impact? Not necessarily an immediate impact, but something concrete that moves us forward, or your own definition of forward. So I think that's just like, that's what we hear all the time. I guess I want to interject just for a minute and just say how awesome it is to be part of For Our Kids, where we have about 25 teams across the country in a bunch of different provinces and territories that are making real change in their communities and working together nationally. So we have so many stories and examples. And for those who are new to For Our Kids, I just encourage you to go to forourkids.ca and click on the stories section and see all these stories and examples. We can't go through all of them today, but it's definitely it's something that people come back to. So do any of the three of you want to speak to that?
I'm happy to say a couple of things. So it's an interesting question, and I agree with you. In the modern age, I think a lot of us feel overwhelmed by the number of things that we have to do and the amount of time that we actually have available to spend on our families, on ourselves. I guess, the tough answer to that would be understand that we're all overwhelmed, but at the end of the day, we all have to make choices around priorities. And in my mind, my opinion, but in my mind, you know, for parents, for dads, and for moms, I think, you know, there is no more important issue in terms of the future of your children than this. If you look at the science around what happens if we do not take action, there is no more important issue for your children's future than this. But I would say that, you know, different people have different levels of bandwidth depending on a whole range of different factors, including aging parents and all kinds of things. And in that context, I think, you know, we should all ask ourselves, what are the specific personal changes or investments that we can make that may or may not take a lot of time, but that actually demonstrate that this is a priority for you and for me. And that can be some of the things that I talked about before. I would say the smallest investment, and again, I'm not in any way intending this to be partisan, but is to ensure that you're actually thinking about this issue in the context of the decision you make with respect to casting your ballot, which does have an impact both provincially and federally in terms of policies that happen. I was meeting recently with the UK minister, and we were talking about climate. He's a conservative, and the United Kingdom is incredibly ambitious on climate change. It has become a completely non-partisan issue in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in France, where it doesn't matter whether you're a right-winger or a left-winger, you're a green, you're a socialist, that it's a given that you need to take aggressive action on climate. We have not reached that level of political maturity in this country, but we need to get there. And the only way we get there is if you, as a voter, demand that.
Thank you.
I guess one of the observations I'll make, and I think, again, I alluded to it in some of my earlier answers, is, yeah, I mean, this sense of being overwhelmed. I think, yeah, that's a very common experience, and being pulled in a lot of different directions. I think especially, I really have to carefully dose how much, you know, sort of climate catastrophe information I take in. It has a very profound impact on my emotional, psychological well-being. So I, you know, dose that carefully. But one of the antidotes to that is, you know, this action and finding others. So the community that I've found in For Our Kids and in reaching out beyond our group into the community has been encouraging, energizing, and sort of, you know, balm for my soul in many ways. So I would make the observation that, you know, the time that you put in, if you find the right context, will, you know, give back to you and, you know, help energize you for the battles ahead.
Just gonna hop in here. If you're really overwhelmed, so when I had my young ones, I was really overwhelmed raising two toddlers. I love my wife very much, but she was also really overwhelmed. It was a lot of work, and I was at home for the first a year of, you know, their lives. If you know, and you know, that's hard. That is a 24-hour job. And I want to try to encourage you to remember that right now, all you got to do is love them, and that everything else will actually work out okay. Because if you really love them and you're really like worried about everything in the world, then you will hand that over to them. And when everybody is ready and you're not overwhelmed, then you will all actually not be able to make change. And you know that using all that you know, worry, all that energy to try to redirect that into just loving them, you know, running around with them, you know, laughing with them, trying to use all that just to try to be happy, because that will help to create, like a generation, that will actually facilitate, like the change that, like we need.
Thank you. It's a lot. It's a lot. So I think that you three have already partly answered this, but the question is, what do you do to recharge? So it's, right in line with this question of overwhelm and so much going on, and, and I'm hearing, things that keep us going, just taking action, and also, spending time with our kids. But for the three of you personally, is there something that you do? Do you need to escape once a week or once a month or once a year? Or, is it like watching Netflix after the kids go to bed? How is it that you recharge, and so that you can just keep going and be healthy?
I'm happy to start if that works for folks. So probably the most important way I recharge, I actually, John Paul said he grew up in Saskatchewan. I also grew up in Saskatchewan. And I'm sure my parents probably knew your parents. So I go back to Saskatchewan every year. Until last year, I took both my daughters with me since they were 3 or 4. When I grew up in the summers in the boreal forest in the north, which is an ecosystem that remains in balance. Very little, very few people, very little industrial activity. It's a land of forests, lakes, and rivers, and so I go back with them each year and go into the wilderness and spend a couple of weeks where the only thing around you were bears, and if you're lucky, a boreal caribou. So that's how I recharge. And certainly I do intend to go back and go there and see my parents this summer.
Thank you.
I take walks. Walks in the city in the early morning. Those are crucial for maintaining my balance.
Sounds good.
I try to remind myself every day that I love to hang out with my children, because it's not always awesome every day. Some days they're not really fun to hang out with. I'll tell you, some days you're like, just give me 5 minutes. And I think to myself, hold on. I have to try to remember that I want these children. I want to be happy with them. I want everybody, to work at this. And I just, I try to do that. So what do I do to recharge? I hang out with them. We go out in the woods. So I've got a trimaran, a kayak. It's this wonderful sailing kayak, and we journey around all the islands here. So I like to travel to the old villages on all of the islands, and let my children know the history. This is the village of Qwustenuxun, and they used to harvest seals here. And there's a big shell midden over there. That's so just trying to reorient them to where they are. And they always have the most wonderful questions, like, why is there a house on a village there, Dad? Or why do we have to pay to camp here, Dad? I thought this used to be our village. And you're like, well, it's it's the way of the world, son. So they look after it, so that's what we do. So I guess in a way it doesn't end for me. I like to do that job. That's what I like. That's where I'm happy. When I'm on the water and I'm 1.5 hours into a 3-hour trip, and you know, those young guys are on the boat, you know, and like we see you know, whales, we see dolphins, you know, we see all that stuff. So that's really where I rejuvenate. Oh, heads up.
Thank you, Ejka. We're gonna ask one more question, and then we're gonna have just a quick round of final remarks from each speaker, and then we'll be done today. So before I ask the last question, I just want to encourage people to keep the conversation going, of course, afterwards. And I think that all three of these speakers are pretty available, not available, are possible to reach, I'll say. I know that you can find John Paul through the For Our Kids website. If you go to the website and find For Our Kids Toronto, go to the website, find the list of teams, the local groups, and go to Toronto and contact them. You'll find John Paul there. You can also look them up on Facebook. With Qwustenuxun, I know that you can go to the Discourse online newspaper and find his email address there. And you can also follow him on Facebook. I believe you post a lot of public things there that anyone can follow. Minister Wilkinson, of course, you know, you work for the people. We can find you. Actually, I had a specific question for you. Twitter. Now, I'm curious, like, if we post something on Twitter, do you actually see it? Like, are you actually on, or is it a staff member who tells you like, oh, Galen sent you a really nice tweet today? Like, how does that work? Or do you have like a secret Twitter handle? How do you deal with Twitter?
I am on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and I do check them. Although I have to admit that I do have staff that do some of the posting and those kinds of things for me, but I do. You have to be careful about reading all the comments, though, I would say, especially on Twitter. It can be a fairly toxic environment, especially for politicians. So
yeah, it can be a bad place. Okay, well that's good to know. You're hearing some stuff there though. So follow up with these guys later on. So the final question was what would you say if someone feels hopeless? And this person also apologized that this question might be too dark, but it's real. What would you say to someone who feels hopeless?
You're not alone. You're not alone. I think everybody else here has that on the inside. You think like, what if like we actually try all this stuff and you know, like it doesn't work? Like, yeah, really? Right? I'm in a room that's 31 degrees inside because we've been trying to refrain from letting any heat in, but it was 43 degrees outside of my house today. That's crazy. I'm afraid too. How do I handle that? That is my fuel, really. That's like, okay, well, what am I going to do about it? Like, what is, you know, like the agenda? How will I use that, you know, to make change, as opposed to just being like, I'm going to run away and hide. I am not a hider. I'm a warrior, and I'm going to use that. And I'm going to use that, you know, to try to educate, to try to make change, to try to research, you know, because there are 7 billion of us out there. If we all researched and we all worked on this and we all helped, man, it'd be over easy and fast. So using all that to try, you know, like move ahead. Yeah. Oh, hi, Sapa.
Thank you.
So, I mean, that's an important question, because I think a lot of people do feel overwhelmed by the climate challenge, and the fact that we just don't have a lot of time to address it. And I guess what I would say is, if all you look at is the scale of the challenge and the enormity of it, it can certainly be depressing, and it can certainly get you into a mindset where you say, well, why bother? That being said, I think that for folks who are feeling like that, one of the things that you should do is look at some of the progress that actually has been made. Not fast enough, but that has been made. If you looked 20 years ago, there was almost no wind or solar power that was being generated anywhere in the world. And when it started to actually be introduced, it was way more expensive than any other type of power generation, particularly a lot more expensive than coal. Which, as you all know, is the worst form of power generation from a climate perspective. And yet, if you look at what's happened in the last 20 years, it's gotten to the point now where not only are wind and solar actually growing far more rapidly in terms of power than any other source of energy, but it's actually cheaper. In many parts of the world, it's way cheaper to build a wind farm than it is to build a coal-fired power plant. That's a fundamental change that is actually going to have very significant impacts going forward for a whole range of different reasons. That's just one example, and there are lots of them. So sometimes it's about appreciating some of the things that have been done, not just focusing on the scale of the challenge. And then the other thing I would say is, and then it's about taking small steps in your own life and trying to actually be part of a solution, not thinking that necessarily you can solve all of the problems because none of us can on our own. But trying to think about what you can do in your own life, either through specific actions or through actually working with your neighbors or your family to create more understanding and more action as to how you can be part of, a small part of a collective effort that can result in big changes. And I think that's how you keep yourself motivated.
Thank you.
I'll just chime in briefly here. I mean, I'll reiterate what I said. I mean, for me, the key thing has been finding this community of people who share this concern. One of the things that I did in the C12 campaign was I actually wrote letters to my neighbors, introducing myself and inviting them to be part of a Zoom call with our MP. And, you know, a lot of people are sharing this feeling of hopelessness and concern, and coming together and doing something, responding to it in a productive way, whatever that way may be, really can help put those feelings, those unproductive feelings, out of the foreground. And I've, personally found that being involved with For Our Kids has really helped contribute to a significant improvement in my emotional and psychological health. And that's, I'm not just saying it. I mean, I was being kept awake with climate change nightmares, and those have abated. Climate change has not, but the nightmares have. And that's a very real difference in my life. So I don't think I'm alone with that.
You're not alone. Thank you so much for sharing that, John Paul. Well, that brings us to our closing round. So this is just a chance for the three of you to say any last words that you didn't get a chance to get in there. And any order is fine.
I'll start. First of all, this has been like a parenting counseling session for me, actually, to listen to you, particularly Qwustenuxun. Super inspiring. I mean, obviously heartbreaking, but I think that you centering your actions around your relationship with your child really does put the emphasis where it needs to be, on the kid and on the love that we want to share with our child. And so that was really profound for me to be reminded of that here tonight. It's also been heartening to see such a great level of interest. I knew that people cared, were concerned, but to see so many people here on this call willing to take their time for such a, what was at times a very, very heavy evening, but I'm coming away feeling buoyed. So thank you all for that.
Thank you.
Maybe I'll leave it to Jared to close off as he started us off this evening. I guess I would say a couple things. One is I just want to give a shout out. I think I see a familiar face. I think that's Jim Stevenson on the line. He has been a long time champion for climate change on the North Shore in Vancouver. A couple things. The first is, it's interesting if you look at public opinion polling. what you find, and this remains the case today, that women tend to put far more emphasis on important social issues like education and healthcare. And often those are issues that are actually directly associated with our kids. And men, as a group, not everybody, but as a group, are more inclined to actually put more emphasis on economic issues. That hasn't fundamentally changed, even as our sort of 1950s type gender roles have evolved towards equality. You still see that difference in public opinion polling in terms of where people put emphasis. And I guess what I would say is, in my mind, it's not just mom's role to care and to act with respect to our kids in the future that our children have and will inherit. And I think that that those on this call know that. They wouldn't be here if they didn't know that. And I think many here are probably trying to figure out the way in which they personally can be involved in a way that actually will be meaningful in addressing the climate issue in their own way. And there are lots of different ways that people can do that. But perhaps it's even more important that the men that are actually on this call are actually talking to the men that are their friends and the people they know in their business and social circles about why it's so important that more men actually care more, or at least value more some of these issues that are so important for their children. Because it's not like men love their kids less than women. But somehow we need to get, in the same way that we have made the important and very positive step towards gender equality in terms of roles, we also, I think, need to make progress in terms of what we value. And there is a challenge to men, I think, to have those conversations with other men as we move forward, because this is not just an issue for moms.
Thank you.
I have talked about salmon. I talked about elders. I talked about the river. I haven't addressed our trees. And I just really want to use this, like last opportunity, to say that try to teach your children the value of the trees, of the moss that holds the water in to help to keep the water within the river and a watershed. I live on an island that has been absolutely horrendously logged, and it has not even, it's worse and worse every day. And it's reaching a point where anybody who tries to defend the last of our trees, of our watersheds, of the old growth, we're now activists, when I don't think we should be the ones who are labeled. We are here to try to look after our children and the children after them. And without those trees, there's no water in the river, and without the river, there's no life. So use these opportunities, these years, while you're with your young ones, to try to educate them about the value of the watershed and of trees. And I'm just going to wrap up. I love this quote, but I don't really like who it's from. But she said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your children.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So thank you to all three of you. I want to just give a couple more thank yous to everyone who helped out making this event a success. We have such an engaged network of parents, and several parents wrote in with questions. I mean, lots of parents wrote in with questions, but there were clearly just a lot of parents that were really engaged. A lot of moms that were really engaged in this event and wanting it to be successful. So thank you to all of you. Thank you to Amber and Lela, who are the other two staff members who are on the call right now. Actually, Matt is on here too. I want to really highlight Amber and Lela because they helped out a ton. They were doing a lot of the background tech work today, or all of it actually. And also they are two people that you should totally get in touch with if you're wanting to get involved. Amber at forourkids.ca or Lella at forourkids.ca. Another way to get involved, I mean, you know, just reach out. That's always the first step. Reach out to one of us and say, hey, what can I do? There's also an opportunity tomorrow. There's a welcome call. It'll be smaller than this. It'll be much more interactive than this. You'll have a chance to speak. So everyone can speak at the welcome call tomorrow. You can find out about it on our website, forourkids.ca. It's at the same time, actually. It's 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Eastern is always a challenge, balancing all the different coasts in this country. I just encourage everyone to take care of themselves. These are really wild and honestly dangerous times that we're living in right now and today in particular for many of you, for many of us. I want to give a shout out to my mom who's on the call and my stepdad who looks like you're awake now, Larry. You two, you know, always took me outside and really instilled in me this love of nature. And so I really want to thank both of you for kind of like setting me on this path. And now I'm, you know, doing my best to pass it on to my kids. And we had a question earlier about, you know, what do I do if I don't want to go to meetings and I want to be hands-on? If you're in BC, just go to Fairy Creek, find a way, bring your kids. You know, that's one example. But there's a place for everyone in what's going on right now. And so it's not always easy to find that place. And so, you know, we try to, each of us, find it ourselves and then reach out to our neighbors and our friends and help them figure out what their place is. Maybe it's at tomorrow's meeting at the welcome call at 4 o'clock. Maybe it's at Fairy Creek. Maybe it's something totally different, but let's help each other find that. Thank you so much. What a really amazing conversation. I just thank all three of you. And I look forward to the next time we get to speak. Good night. Night, Chika.